Being unhoused is an all-encompassing enterprise. It takes your emotional health, it takes your mental health, and it takes your physical health. And many times when unhoused people are surrounded by forces and things that they don't understand, like most human beings do, we look to find ways to protect ourselves. Some of them good and some of them not so good and some of them scary. This episode talks about what happens when you're an American citizen, but you're unhoused, and how your vote is not counted or ignored.
When I started running, some of the first responses I got were, why do you think you're capable of that? You don't have the institutional support to do that. You aren't integrated enough into the quote-unquote right communities, using this weird language to basically say, you're not good enough to do this yet.
There are many things unhoused people need to do to understand when you're unhoused that you need to arm yourself legally, as well as understanding your civic responsibility. The first thing you need to know as an unhoused person is you need to know who your senior lead officer is. Their name and number, and in case abuses arise, which they will, that you need to have that on hand. The second thing you need to know is who your council member is. Many people, housed and unhoused, do not know who their council member is. And because of the fact that the council member only lets you know who they are during election time or when they're doing some photo opportunity, I can assure you that many housed NIMBYs are fully aware of who their council member are. They lead the letters, they have the hateful letters, and they know who their senior lead officer is because they're the ones that are calling the police on you. In this episode, we're going to discuss things that we need to understand as it pertains to voting, as well as I have an interesting interview with a special guest that's running for Congress. Unhoused news. Los Angeles judge denies bid to revive vote to form Skid Row Council. LA County Superior Court Judge Mitchell Beckloff said Wednesday, February 5th, that he would not change the results of the election, even though the city acknowledged records of online votes were destroyed. The formation of the council failed by 60 votes. Unhoused advocates said the process was biased against the houseless community. In Sacramento, the unhoused community is suing the police over the removal of a portable toilet at a downtown living space. On Wednesday, February 5th, 2020 at 7 p.m., the Palms Neighborhood Council will present two motions in regards to the police murder of Victor Valencia. One of the motions is to send a letter to the Los Angeles Police Department with the following request regarding the death of Victor Valencia. Number one, release the recording of the 911 call that the Los Angeles police responded to. Number two, release to the family of Victor Valencia any video footage from surrounding businesses that the LAPD uses in the use of force investigation. In other unhoused news, the United States student unhoused population reaches 1.5 million, the highest in a decade, reaching an increase of 15% in the past 3 years. California is at the forefront with 263,000 students. The ages range from pre-kindergarten age 3 to 18 years old and older. More than 182,000 students reported living in shelters, transitional housing, or awaiting foster care. Students living in the streets spiked to 102,000 at 137% in the past years. In Portland, Oregon, an unhoused woman's infant child died in the cold. More unhoused news. Mitchell Farrell has already met in person with the housed residents of 1902 Park Avenue regarding their concerns about the unhoused community. He continues to refuse to meet with the unhoused constituents about their needs and concerns. Mitchell Farrell continues to order the erasure of unhoused neighbors at Echo Park Lake, bonding with the unhoused vigilantism and weaponizing the police and park rangers that come with Nazi-era education tactics about park rules. Residents and supporters respond, "Where do we go?" Police are called on fictitious accusations, and the administration of Mitchell Farrell are planning a violent campaign to permanently remove the unhoused community. The majority of this community supports the peaceful residents of Echo Park Lake, and they say, you can try to arrest us, but you cannot erase us. being unhoused has the most diverse community ever, period. And in the studios, we're going to talk about what our unhoused neighbors in one subset of our community encounters. In this episode, we're going to highlight the LGBTQ index. We're going to interview a trans man as well as a trans man that's running for Congress. And introducing our returning guest is Mr. Joseph Mohammed. So welcome again.
Hello, Theo. Glad to join you today.
Yes. We talked earlier, and we're going to talk a little bit about your experiences, just to remind the audience. Tell us a little of your story so newer members can listen in and understand.
Well, my name is Joseph Mohammed. I'm from Spokane, Washington. I am homeless because I'm a persecuted political dissident. I'm a very proud conspiracy theorist, so I don't have any problem with people poking fun at me for those types of things. But I am very well educated. I have a lot of knowledge. I also have disabilities, so I do receive an SSI check each month that helps me through the homelessness. I am one of the unhoused people who have some resources each month to take care of myself to some degree.
Also, can you let us know, is there any challenges of being transgender out here in the streets?
There are, I think, probably multiple challenges being transgender. One of them is the misunderstanding about transgenders that permeates all of society as to why we exist. And there's a lot of misinformation that's being given out by official sources on that. And the medical conditions that actually create us, medical conditions that are promoted by industrial pollution, are not being discussed in most of the mainstream mass media that's introducing us to the general public, but not necessarily trying to get people not to hate us, not to discriminate against us, but in not giving them the correct information, they're doing a great disservice.
I agree. What are the challenges that have you faced as being a transgender man? Are you able to go to shelters to get the service?
I can go to shelters. I have been to some before, but I have problems at shelters. The unhoused homeless community, as you said, it is the most diverse community, definitely that I've ever been in, and I seek out diversity. So it's really incredibly diverse, and we run from sinners to saints out here. And so one of the problems I have there's multiple problems with the shelters, but one of them, for example, that's specific to me being transgender, has to do with my body being different from the other men who are staying at the shelter. Because of the high number of drug addicts who are among the homeless and stay at the shelters. The shelters that I have been to, and I have not been to any in Los Angeles, but I went to shelters in Denver and Phoenix. They have no doors on the restroom stalls. So that's a problem for me right there, because I need a little bit more privacy than the other dudes, or else dudes are curious about me as to why I'm sitting down to simply urinate. And then it has to become a big explanation about being a transgender, and then they discover my body is different, and then there's an issue about how transgenders are created and whether they're prejudiced or not, what their level of knowledge about the subject, etc. And it creates basically a dangerous situation.
Do you find these same challenges when you shower? Do you have any of those challenges?
There is absolutely no way for me to shower at the shelters because they are group showers. It's like a locker room shower. If I can go to a place that has private individual showers, that's fine. I've done that in Phoenix, for example, at the St. Vincent de Paul main building in Phoenix has curtains up around, so you've got an individual shower. I kind of have to be careful because, there's still, some rooms in between the curtains. People can peek in and stuff like that. But they have like a double curtain thing. So Phoenix is better for me in that regard. I've been told that here in Los Angeles, there's the shower truck. I think it comes, I know it's on Wednesdays by East City Hall.
Yes.
And I've been told that has private.
Right. And that is also the Showers for Hope. That's also in MacArthur Park as well.
Right. If they're private showers, I can use them, but private showers are not always available. And one thing you have to remember is that most human beings, whether they're transgender or not, do not like to be in group showers. Most people like privacy when they're showering, and I personally, believe we have a human right to have that privacy.
I agree too. I think that's modeled from the prison mentality that the society biases play into. But go ahead.
Right. So, I think that most women prefer to shower just, in private, and I think most men prefer to shower just in private. And so those showers are highly utilized. And so that could be a long line. It could be, you're not going to get one today, and the truck only comes once a week, that sort of stuff. So, if I want to use that traveling truck shower, I got to find out where it is and get in line early, that sort of stuff.
I will release at the end of the episode some of where the locations are, and maybe I can interview one of the members of the mobile showers in another episode. But I want to ask a genuine question that some of our listeners probably would like to know is, what is the best way to show the proper respect to our neighbors, our transgender unhoused neighbors? Because all of us are in a similar situation, despite we are unhoused. No matter how we got here, we're all unhoused. So we're all going to face some kind of challenges differently than housed. I'm African American, but I have faced some challenges as an African American unhoused man that's a little bit different than African American housed. So I'm sure you probably have some challenges that's probably different than the transgender that is housed than the transgender that is unhoused. So how can we show the proper respect to you?
Theo, I'm going to be honest. On the street, among other unhoused people, I have not had many problems with discrimination or hatred or anything like that. I'm not going to say that it doesn't exist. I'm not going to say that there isn't somebody who occasionally will say something to me about me being a transgender, that sort of stuff. I even actually got in a fight once over it. But I would say 95% of the people have absolutely no problem. They just, homeless people are not highly pretentious people. They tend to just meet you on a basic human-to-human level, really judging each other by the content of character, because there's not a lot else that we can judge each other on out here. It's not about, who's got the most money, who's got the nicest clothes. I mean, it's not about that kind of stuff on the streets with the unhoused. It's about really the kind of person you are, and that's how your friends get made and how your friendships get broken apart as well.
Excellently put it. What can we, as the housed community, do to show the proper respect to our friends out here?
I think the biggest thing, whether you're housed or unhoused, about the transgender, call it the transgender issue these days, is that we are growing in numbers. And that really needs to be explored as to why we're growing in numbers. And when you stop listening to what they're saying on TV, on the talk shows, and on the radio talk shows and stuff like that, and start doing your research online, you find the actual science. And it has nothing to do with gender fluidity. It has to do with bona fide medical conditions that put males into feminized bodies and females into masculinized bodies. These are birth defects. And when people understand that this is not, I don't know whether I'm male or female, I can't decide sort of stuff, when they understand what's really going on, when they get the truth about it, I think there's going to be a much higher level of acceptance, because it's not about we're all crazy and we don't know what gender we are. We do know what gender we are, but our bodies do not match our genders because of birth defects. They're medical conditions, and they are in the research, but they're not being told about to the general public.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mohammed, that you have definitely opened my eyes to learning a little more about the subject, and I hope my audience is as well. And like I say, we all have one thing in common: humanity. And with the unhoused, we are a community. So if we treat the least of us, or the most of us, I should say, that means that reflects on us and all of us as a society. We all rely on human interaction and respect and dignity and kindness. And that goes despite whatever circumstance we find ourselves in, or whatever reality that's going on outside in your own home, as well as being unhoused. I thank you all for listening, and may we again meet in the light of understanding. Many times we hear among housed and unhoused residents, what's the point in voting? But for the unhoused community, it is extremely important because many of the housed residents are voting for the council people that are the ones that are displacing you. So public policy is decided at the polls. You must take your position in speaking out and firing these politicians. You can have an impact on the decisions affecting your life if you register and if you vote. It is essential. For the housed residents and the ones that wish to help register unhoused people to vote, 70% of those registered by volunteer efforts go to the polls and vote in presidential elections. Voting helps reconnect them with their community in the most positive of ways. Unhoused people, you're eligible to vote if you are a citizen of the United States, a legal resident of your state, at least 18 years of old by election day, a convicted fellow rights are restored, and you don't have to read or write in English to register to vote. Voting is an essential right in America. It's what makes us very unique in a democratic union. And because of that, we as unhoused people are overlooked in our voices, which gives business owners and people that live in houses more power. They want to displace you, they want to disenfranchise you, and they condescendingly think that know what's best for you. You lose sense of agency. There's many things that people talk about when we talk about voting. I've come across housed and unhoused. What's the point in voting? We're going to get somebody worse, or we may get somebody worse. We might as well keep what we got. Here's the problem. If you don't be the catalyst for change, as Shirley Chisholm says, then you can just sit there and whine and complain, but you can't whine and complain when they keep displacing you. Your civil rights are violated. Your medication is taken that keeps you surviving. Your information that you need for you to get housing. And the politicians know this. And the politicians know and are very annoyed and angry about unhoused people starting to rise up and coordinate. Right now, they're sitting somewhere trying to plan a sweep on you. Right now, they're planning to complain to a news media outlet like Fox News and says the reason why their hands are tied is because of Proposition 47 in order for them to continue to take your civil rights away. Right now, somewhere in some meeting, there is some business improvement district owners complaining about unhoused people being an eyesore to the community. Right now, somewhere in the community of some very well-heeled area, there are people running around banding together in order to deny you of human rights, to vilify you, to criminalize you, and to beat down or punch down on your living situation. In times such as these, we are faced with a pivotal moment. What can we do? That one vote will start a sea of many moving parts for you to move into your own agency. And as such, we the unhoused feel it is our right or our duty to tell you the things that you are eligible to do. And we want you to become part of the elective process. If there is no room for you at the table, bring your own folding chair. Shirley Chisholm said that. Voting right facts. 60% of the wealth in this country is inherited. No other ethnic group has been a slave or cast, or their color is a stigma. So the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was very pivotal for African Americans, which is the opposite of what Grace Yu, Mark Ridley Thomas, Jake June, and Catherine Barger are trying to do away with your civil rights. They believe that they consider themselves the civil rights martyrs of the past, which is an insult to my ancestors and my family members who fought in the civil rights for the basic issues to vote. According to Alexander Ocasio-Cortez, bootstrapping means to many housed GOP is that you didn't go to public school, that you didn't enlist in the military, which is funded by the government, that you never got a tax break for starting a business or buying a home, that your parent never used food assistance to feed you. And to their eyes, that you are a leech on the system of their hard-earned money, which they forget to mention that you were working too and you paid in your taxes as well. But they tend to neglect that. Voters can choose from multiple centers. They are open February 22nd to Election Day on March 3rd, 2020. Voters can vote on their cell phones. Who is in your district? There are 15 districts, but only 10 are up for re-election. And here is where we, the Unhoused, offers endorsement or not. District 2, Paul Krikorian is the incumbent. He is the one that is responsible for displacing and criminalizing the Unhoused. Running against him is Allende Jones and Rudy Melendez. Their platforms are not known. In District 4, David Rue, who has refused to work with candidate Nithya Raman on helping the Unhoused. In episode 7, I interviewed her on her platform on the Unhoused. She seems to have a solid plan. Also running in District 4 is Sarah Kate Levy. In District 6, Nuri Martinez, current council member and president of the city council, has declared war on the Unhoused. She has shown a growing detest for unhoused people by pushing for ordinances and strict enforcement of 5611 that displace and criminalize unhoused people. In retaliation of the upholding of the Ninth Circuit Court ruling of Martin versus Boise, Nuri Martinez gave a dog whistle address, signaling that she will return to traumatizing unhoused people, harkening back to Nazi-era policies and safer street initiatives that was a disaster here in Los Angeles, California. In my first episode, we talked with General Dogon how Ann Moody was arrested over 87 times. Running on the same ticket is Benny Bernal. He's also running against Nuri Martinez as well as Bill Haler. In District 8, Marquise Harris Dawson is running after his potential opponent was not approved to run. His stance on the Unhoused changes as the wind blows. He was for augmenting 4118, which would displace unhoused constituents. And District 10, I mentioned a little bit about this earlier, but Mark Ridley Thomas is an acolyte of Donald Trump's final solution on the houseless community, appearing concerned about the unhoused and insinuating that unhoused advocates are fighting to keep them on the streets, which is not the truth. We are fighting for them to keep their civil rights and be able to get the appropriate supportive services. He is concerned about that he wants them all in shelters and out of the eyesight of the community. He is also concerned that the fact that he's African American and allows him to think he's in touch with the African American community, and he is in fact deluded. In District 10, Grace Yu. Grace Yu is considered the Harriet Tubman or the Rosa Parks of the Korean civil rights movement. She is the defiler of these great American heroes and an offensive figure to African Americans who fought for the freedoms of my ancestors and civil rights. She was a vocal opponent against the shelter in Koreatown. Mind you, this is the antithesis of what Dr. King stood for and those ancestors. They were attacking poverty. Grace Yu is a very wealthy and has wealthy supporters that back her anti-unhoused, anti-black, and anti-poor sentiment. She ginned up stereotypes against unhoused people, being a danger to schools and businesses. She used the flyer of an encampment as they are the problem. The implications are clear with the anti-black and brown sentiment. That is putting many of her supporters. Some of it stems from the LA riots, which was sparked by Soon Jo Ja blowing away a 15-year-old Latasha Harling for a bottle of juice. Many believed at the time she was justified in killing this young girl, which has smoldered over the years and comes up when they see black and Latino unhoused members of their community. District 12, John Lee is running and is the current council member. His stance on the unhoused is very tepid and very fickle. Lorraine Lundquist is his opponent, who offers a more robust plan when tackling the unhoused crisis. District 14, no one of the platform is known about the houseless crisis, and they are Monica Garcia, John Jimenez, Kevin De Leon, Cindy Odison, and Raquel Zamora. In District 2, I mentioned in my promo about Jake Jung. Jake Jung is an enemy to the unhoused people. He, as well as Grace Yu, are backed by anti-black, anti-unhoused supporters with deep pockets. They have perverted the black community with calls that Jake Jung and Grace Yu are MLK and Rosa Parks. Why is this extremely offensive is they made no effort to correct or publicly apologize about this disgusting correlation. They forget to mention that before his death, Dr. King was part of the Poor People's Campaign. They have implied that unhoused people are criminals against seniors and children. Holly Mitchell is running. She has no platform, as well as Jorge Nuri. Jan Perry is another anti-unhoused candidate calling for criminalization and civil rights violations. Ramon Lorenzo Regard and Albert Robles is also known on their platform against the unhoused. Also in District 2 is Herb J. Wesson. He is the incumbent and former president of the city council. He and other council members tried to ram a more criminal focus on 4118 to the Unhoused. After vigorous protests, they backed off. He used his son's addiction to run for office as it is based on his choosing to be a criminal. We the Unhoused wonders what his thoughts are on the police and Mayor Cressetti's lock them up stances. District 4, Janice Hahn and Desiree T. Washington is running, and not much is known on their stances. Janice Hahn joins in the hatred of unhoused community, as well as District 5, Catherine Barger, who listens to Trump, and Dr. Drupinski, who believes all unhoused people are mentally ill and substance usages, and has hostile delusions on unhoused crisis. John C. Harabidin is unknown, as well as Daryl Park. And so these are the information on the people that are running. If you want for a more further detailed analysis, and the second part, I will offer a couple of more detailed analysis on some of the candidates that seem to have no platform. Good morning. This is Theo Henderson from We the Unhoused. And today we have a very special guest. Charlie Madison Winters, who goes by the pronouns of she and her, is running for Congress. And she is the catalyst for change. I want to let her have her story because it's important for the unhoused community, because we have a very diverse community, to understand what her platform is and how she's going to help the unhoused community and what visions does she see. So without further ado, let Charlie tell us a little bit about herself. How did you feel this, the calling to run for Congress?
Okay. Well, hi, I'm Charlie. I mean, first of all, I've always wanted to do this. Politics is something I paid attention to for a long time and cared about, but, paying attention to it does not necessarily make a run or anything. But I'm trans, I'm autistic, I've spent a large percentage of my life just banging my head against the wall of the system, trying to make sure I can, I'm a 6-time college dropout. There were no accommodations in that in order for me to do anything. A lot of my friends are trans, disabled. I'm fortunate in that my partner who helps support me while I do things like run for office or be chronically unemployed. I'm really lucky in that respect, but a lot of my friends aren't, and I'm trying to support them. I'm watching them struggle with the same things that I struggle with and be punished entirely worse for it just because of circumstance. I've seen people struggle with housing. My friends are just going from job to job. Even the people I know who graduated college, they're drowning in debt. There's so much wrong. Like, you have to walk through the world ignoring so much. That's just absolutely horrifying. And at some point I decided I wanted to stand up and run here and provide an alternative to our long-term 24-year incumbent who just sort of assumes everything will be fine. She'll just keep getting elected and she doesn't necessarily have to promise anything. I'm getting a little upset about it because
Take your time, please. We want to hear your story.
Well, it's just that's a lot of it. I'm struggling. Everyone I know is struggling. I want to stand up and run for office because there's always someone who stands up to challenge the incumbent here, and every year the incumbent loses just a little bit more support. Because when you've been in office for 24 years, and this is what happened over the last 24 years, the gutting of our welfare state, an absolute lack of resources. One of the things that really drives me to run for office is 6 months after I graduated high school, the economy just collapsed. And I grew up in a suburban area in a family that was relatively middle class. And when you're there, they're telling you a lot about what the world is like and what you can do and what you can expect. And it never seemed quite right because you can see so many counterexamples to those narratives. But when you grow up in it, you just sort of assume, yeah, okay, you work hard, you get a little somewhere. Maybe it's not as good as they said, but you do it. And that was a complete lie. There's nothing that I can personally do other than fight for what I believe and stand up and organize people against this miserable system that's actually going to get me anywhere in this life. Success is relatively out of my control, except as we create it on the ground. And realizing that from the moment I graduated high school onward, as I watched everyone I know struggle to accomplish anything, as I watched bankers repossess families I knew's houses, turning half of Denver into rental property. At some point, I got incredibly fed up and said, you know what, I'm just just going to provide an alternative, because none of the alternatives thus far have been substantially different enough. I want people to be able to vote for housing for all, Medicare for all, actual substantial universal socialist programs that they haven't had the chance to because no one's actually stood for them. Yeah, and I also just want people to have an alternative that's not funded by interests that oppose them. The incumbent takes a lot of medical insurance money and says that she'll support Medicare for all, but I frankly don't believe that in that situation. And I want people to be able to vote for someone who definitely doesn't take insurance money.
If I may interject there, I have another follow-up question. What do you think your unique skills would be to make you successful in running for office?
That's an interesting one. I talk to people about that a lot because, like, the skills necessary to run for office are like completely the opposite of the skills you want in a person elected to office. And occasionally we get someone really cool who they coalesce inside together. The ability to, like, you know, organize and be charismatic and sort of have a brand that is reasonable within this strange electoral system, while also being really thoughtful, fighting for what is right, having strong ideological conviction. I don't know. I'd like to think I have a little of both of those. Mostly, I think my skills would do really well in Congress. I try to be really thoughtful. I try to explore as much nuance as I can. I ask a lot of structural-based questions. I look at the problems that we have as failings of our society, not as issues that bad actors caused or that, like, the right person can fix. I, as one individual member of the House, can be as thoughtful as I want to be, but nothing's going to get done unless there are mass movements of people out there in the streets demanding the things that I'm standing for. So my goal here is to try and channel that thoughtfulness into policies that I believe in, and those can be turned into law easily and quickly, but only with a mass movement of people behind it. So that's what I want to bring to the table, is a place we can catalyze that mass movement. Bring people to the table, lift up the organizations who, you know, like in Denver, we have tons of people working on housing, immigrant rights, all these different issues, and I want them to know they have an ally in Congress and that the work that they do turning people out to fight for these things will be promoted, lifted up, and noticed by the country.
Can you give us a little insight on your platform for the unhoused crisis that's sweeping, I'm sure, in Denver, Colorado? It's sweeping all over Los Angeles with the police violations of civil rights. And Mitchell Farrell, and here he refuses to see his constituents that are unhoused, and he's directing, along with the council president, Nuri Martinez, to go out, attack, and basically threaten and harass unhoused people where there are no sufficient places for them to be. And we have been, like, hitting our heads against the wall because of the cozy relationship with the police, the director of sanitation, and Nuri Martinez, who is trying to criminalize unhoused people. In fact, in one of my episodes, there was a gentleman that has never had a criminal record, but since he's been out on the street, has been cited 24 times for having his tent up because he's disabled. And these things affect so many areas. Like, for example, the Trump administration is cutting off benefits for disabled people, housed or unhoused. So what is your platform in order to holding them accountable?
Just to add a little to that, the last election in Denver, we held a referendum on giving unhoused people here a right to survive, a right to use tents more and blankets and things, and it got voted down, which is absolutely devastating because the rich landlords in our state funneled $1.5 million into an ad campaign against unhoused people instead of, you know, I don't know, spending that money to build houses. But at the end of the day, we can't force private landowners to build stuff. No, this is happening everywhere, obviously. But so on my platform, one of the first things I think we can do is we can create civilian police accountability councils to make sure that in addition to disarming cops and changing the ways in which they're allowed to do asset forfeiture, like take stuff from people at a federal level, because a lot of those laws are federal, we can create a framework for every district to put police under the accountability and command of the people of that district. In essence, you elect a board that has complete oversight over the police. That's one thing we can do that will shift the balance of power. That's one of the things I think we can do in addition to disarming cops. That's going to
Can I add something to it? For example, can we have unhoused people on those civilian committees? Because sometimes some well-meaning housed people who have the belief system that police officers are just doing the job, they're good people, and they're not understanding the terroristic actions that they're doing to unhoused people.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely, and I would absolutely love to mandate that these councils have unhoused people on them to make sure that that is represented. Yeah. One of the other things I want to do is just a massive investment in public housing. I mean, one of my core goals here over the course of my lifetime is to help decommodify housing entirely, because it's absolutely seen to me that houses are a good that is bought and sold rather than something we simply provide as a society to everyone who lives here. I know that here in Denver, and I'm sure out there in California, I saw the Moms for Housing out in Oakland, and just these sheer numbers of houses that are built by rich people for no other purpose than to flip them later when the housing prices go up, and then they manipulate housing prices to make sure no one can afford them, and it's unsustainable, but it's also completely immoral. So one of the things I want to do is completely reform all the assistance programs that we have. Like, instead of Section 8 paying out chunks of money to developers and landlords to allow low-income people a couple of units here and there, we should build gigantic public housing units that are mandated to be funded as an entitlement by the federal government, so that you can't demolish them by neglect like they did to the last crop of public housing. Just make them free to people who need them. My goal here is universal policies given first to the people who need it most.
Oh, excellent. Let me ask you, what is the hardest thing about campaigning?
Right now, for me, the hardest part about campaigning is pushing past the nihilism and the hopelessness that a lot of people feel about our political system, how unrepresentative the system is. We just did the Iowa caucus, and everyone on the internet who hadn't realized it yet was starting to realize how undemocratic a caucus really is. And just every step of the way, there's so much paperwork, there's so many rules, it's designed to be impossible. The whole system of who's allowed to support a candidate with money and who's not, and how, restricts a lot of the people out there doing good work through nonprofit systems, simply because we don't have a government that will actually do any of those things. So they're trying to scramble to make up for it, and they can't necessarily support openly because it's against the law. The whole system is rigged against small candidates. And I think the hardest part is,
I think it's what you say about the paperwork. I think that's one thing we share in common, the unhoused community trying to get housing. That quagmire of paperwork and ridiculous rules and the obstacles of society biases and things of that nature. And it makes it very difficult for people living in these shelters or saying that they're shelter resistant. I had a trans man on the earlier episode of that interview, and he said some of the difficulties being trans going to shelters. And I was wondering, do you think running for Congress will inspire more transgender candidates?
Oh, for that? Yeah, absolutely it will. It already has. I'm already getting DMs from people on Twitter about people who want to run everywhere from Canada across the U.S. I've talked to a number of people about this. I'm in Discord groups with lots of trans people who are planning to run in the future. Not only are we starting to realize that we gotta run, but I definitely have had people say to me that I have inspired them to run. And I'm like, great, this feels good. We're all going to do this.
Oh, excellent. What is one of the common myths that you hear about the transgender community?
I don't know if I could pinpoint one exactly. Just the discourse around being trans has been so thoroughly poisoned by right-wingers and people who just don't know a whole lot about things. I think
help educate us, because our listeners, like I say, as you know, probably know, my podcast is reaching a lot of ears, and a lot of people are really eager to do things and learn. So help educate us and help educate me on some of the things that I may be inadvertently ignorant on, I don't want to walk around ignorant. So I just want to educate what's going on.
Well, let's see. In a lot of the organizing spaces I'm in, that we're all starting to do is just assuming you don't know someone's pronouns and asking them when you meet them, introducing yourself with pronouns so that people know. That's a really easy thing that anyone can do, and I like it when people who aren't trans get in on that too, because it's a recognition that we all choose how to do our gender to some degree.
So that's the second thing I want to see is the faux pas from homeless or transients, vagrants, hobos, and all of the terms that has had a very negative stigma. And then some people in some communities wanted to take the word back, like you said, queer. I remember when I was growing up, that was an offensive word, and you wouldn't say. Are there any offensive words that we should, or are you guys retaking? Is there any other language or any words that would be considered rude and offensive to your community that we need to be respectful of?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on who you're talking to. The safest way to do it, I would say, is when you're talking about a trans person, just say trans person, trans woman, trans man, whichever is appropriate to them.
Okay. That was what I was leading to.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
I use the word queer all the time to describe myself because I like that
Right.
word. I feel
Right.
fine reclaiming that. I would just get to know the person, avoid those particular words. Queer is difficult among older folks because
Yes,
they did grow up in
yes.
a world. Yeah, I hear that.
Yes,
And
yeah.
I do use it, and I do want to be careful with that one around folks who had that thrown at them as a slur. Whereas I only did for a small percentage of my life, so it was easy to reclaim, and I get that. But yeah, the word tranny is not great or acceptable among a lot of people I know. And my advice is just let the person show you what words they use and just sort of avoid those until you hear the other person using them. And if you want to say, like, can I use that one? Go for it.
Okay. Well, thank you. You have definitely educated us. Let me see if I got all of the questions. What advice would you give to someone who wants to run for Congress?
Oh, gosh. I mean, I definitely want to start with just do it. I'm part of the Rose Caucus, which is a nationwide network of candidates who are all working together for democratic socialist policies under a unified platform. And we came together when we were vetted by this big crowd of thousands of people who are volunteers on people's campaigns all over the nation. They came together to vet us, figure out who should be in the caucus, and we were able to do that. And so there's a lot of people out there all over the country and the world who want to help you be successful in this. And I've gotten where I am because I chose to run. I put myself out there. And I'm going out there meeting people, doing my thing. But a lot of people just came to me. They DM'd me. They knew me from the past. And they just said, can I help? And the answer is yes, absolutely. So there's tons of people who want to help. And because we're doing this Rose Caucus thing and tons of us are being inspired to run, within a few years, a bunch of people near you will probably know the process who have not been absolutely nihilistically decimated by banging their head against this political system over and over again. Because the thing is, when I started running, some of the first responses I got were, why do you think you're capable of that? You don't have the institutional support to do that. You aren't integrated enough into the quote-unquote right communities, using this weird language to basically say, you're not good enough to do this yet. No one should vote for you. Because there's this electoralism brainworm in people's brains where they're like, oh God, I'd love to vote for you, but you don't dress right or look right, and it makes you less electable. And I hate that. And they're going to tell you that, and you should just run anyway.
Okay. Well, thank you. I was going to say I didn't touch on this. This is another issue that you proudly claim is autism, because we need more of a platform. It's just now becoming into the forefront. What are the things that we need to do to understand what autism is?
Sure. There's a lot of debate going on out there. The information I get is my community of autistic adults who have been thinking about themselves as autistic for a long time now and have gathered online to describe their own experiences, because the most important thing I can warn people about is a lot of the research being done out there is, one, done on autistic kids, and two, it doesn't listen to the actual experiences of those children. It treats them more as test subjects than people who report their experiences. Now, for me, what being autistic means, there's this thing that it needs more research done on it, but it really maps well with autistic adults' experiences, and it's called the intense world theory. I really like this one. The basic idea is that, we all have different experiences of the world, like touch and sight and light and all these things. And for a lot of autistic folks, these are turned up much higher than other people. For me, I can see the flickering of fluorescent lights. Those really bright LED lights can cause me physical pain. Loud noises make my blood boil in a way that they don't seem to bother other people. And there's a lot of that. and it can make things very tiring in the world because you're using a lot more energy to take in a really loud, chaotic world. And so a lot of sensory sensitivities that autistic people experience come in that form. It's just when an autistic person is saying, this hurts, this is uncomfortable, I can't stand to be in here, it's probably true. It's probably because the lights are really bright to a degree that no one else notices because it's just not as intense for them. There's this stereotype that autistic people aren't good at social interaction, but what a lot of us find is that we're actually really, really good at it, to the point where if you look at someone's face, the amount of emotional information you can tell from someone's face, it's astounding. People make tiny little micro expressions with their face that they don't even realize that they're making, but I notice every single bit. So a lot of times we get used to not looking at people's faces when they're talking because we want to focus on the words they're saying, and it's hard to if we're looking them in the eyes because we're just taking in so much information. And a lot of autistic folks describe themselves as hyper empathetic. What they're meaning there is that they're just taking in so much social information.
Right.
Yeah. Those are a couple of ways that I experience being autistic, and a lot of other people I know also experience it.
How can we become a autistic-friendly society?
I mean, this is just a general idea that applies to everyone, from autistic folks, trans folks, the unhoused community, everyone. It's just listen to us when we say what we need, because we live in this world where there is an acceptable standard of how you can be and who you are, and everyone has to conform to it. And a lot of autistic kids are taught from very early on in their lives, you have to stop stimming, which is basically just, it can be talking, it can be touching, it can be flapping our hands. That calms us down and then brings us back into the world, because I don't know why it works, but it does. If I just flap my hands or something, I feel a lot better if I'm ever anxious or nervous. And I'm doing it right now as we're talking a little bit because it helps me focus. But people are taught very early on not to do that. And, many of the therapies used on autistic kids are functionally conversion therapy. One of them was actually created by the guy who invented gay conversion therapy. Yeah, it's still being used. There's a lot of controversy among autistic parents because they're like, well, it's helped my child. And it's you're right. It helped your child be more appropriate for the world, which will increase potential success, but it's also going to increase depression and anxiety because people are forced into these standards. But at its core, if someone is doing something different, I want to live in a world where we approach that with curiosity, where we say, oh, why do you do it that way? In a way that's non-confrontational and isn't about changing someone, but just about understanding them. And I mean, that's part of what informs the politics that I have. The reason that I care so much about doing socialism and have the policies that I do is I want to put the power of our homes or our jobs into the hands of the people who are living in them and working in them. And then we have things like Medicare for all, so we can make sure everyone has access to therapy and other things to help explore what they need and what they want in a space that isn't necessarily as fraught as maybe with all of your neighbors all at once. And that's the one core thing that I can just say is approach people with curiosity. Ask why they are who they are and what they do. Just talk to them.
Well, Charlie, I thank you for your time. And I want to close out with saying this: to understand somebody is to know somebody. To know somebody is to ask them about themselves. And I think, Charlie, you have done a lot to educate our audience. You did a lot to help educate me. And I wish you continued success. I hope you get it. And I hope that we have more change agents in the election process from after the inspiration of Charlie Winters and other people that are not in the mainstream, that are starting to have their voices heard. This is Theo Henderson from We the Unhoused. I thank you all for listening, and may we again meet in the light of understanding.
Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate this.
This episode couldn't be done without the help and efforts of many. I would like to thank our guest, Charlie Winters, on her election, Joseph Mohammed, Jet Perriott, Carlos Nieto, as well as others like Zen and Mario, Craig Wong from the CCED, Democratic Socialist Union, Annie Shaw, Taiji Makawara, as well as many others that remain on the scenes. Melissa, who feeds for the community, Melissa Asadero, Jane Wynn, Mark Horvath. These people are getting the voices out, and as well as Kathy Huck from About My Father's Business and Voting. Our next episode will feature her as an interview, as well as delve deeper into voting rights history. Thank you all again. Service is the rent you pay here on Earth. This is equally important in this episode to discuss how voting affects your life as an unhoused person or formerly unhoused. This is important because there are forces out there that are using this opportunity to further criminalize and demoralize and terrorize you. We've discussed how Grace Yu, Jake June, Jan Perry, Sheila Gall, and many others are not acceptable to unhoused interests. We also discussed with a person that's running for Congress, Charlie Winters, who has some ideas in order to include all people into the voting landscape. We also had a perspective from another guest, Joseph Mohammed, on his experiences dealing with the lack of shelters and the challenges of shelters that offers. It is my hope for the next episode to delve deeper into what the history of Voting Rights Act is and why it was so essential that Dr. King stepped forward and to get it for African Americans in the South at a time of Jim Crow and segregation. Jim Crow is not openly spoke of, but it's definitely unspokenly done here in this community. It's unhoused segregation, it's unhoused apartheid. They are doing everything in their power to make sure our voices are silenced. So it is our hope in the future to end this podcast with nothing concedes a demand without change. Here is some voting history on Black History Month. Harry T. Moore helped sign up black voters throughout the state in the 1930s and 40s. He organized more than 50 Florida branches of the NAACP and investigated lynchings around the state. He was fearless and demanded his respect and equal rights. He refused to be intimidated. However, in 1951, on Christmas night, Harry T. Moore and his wife, Henrietta, was killed by a bomb placed under their bed in Florida. They are the first martyrs of the Civil Rights Movement. This is why using MLK, Rosa Parks, and other giants in the Civil Rights Movement is an insult to their memories. Grace Yu, Jake Jung, and their supporters should be ashamed of themselves to align themselves to these icons and to pervert their message by opposing shelters and to demonizing unhoused people as criminals to seniors and to children. This quote by Dr. Martin Luther King's son says it best when he's describing when people decide to hijack his father's legacy and message. He says, context and context always matter. When my father spoke about the arc of the moral universe bending toward justice, he had just finished marching 50 miles from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. My father used his words and actions to provide leadership to the most successful pro-democratic movement in this country's history. Martin Luther King Jr.'s name is synonymous with justice and fairness. He certainly believed that justice and fairness should be available to everyone. But what mockery, what hypocrisy, and rank opportunism to equate my father's views about 246 years of enslavement and almost 100 years of segregation to undermine constitutional governments. He was replying to Donald Trump, but I also will use that toward the Koreans in Koreatown that has said some hateful things about unhoused people and attacking advocates that are for everyone in, or Koreatown for all. You don't have to be Korean to stand up for civil rights. You don't have to be Korean to do the right thing. Dr. King says the time is always right to do what is right. So when someone says that you have to be black to be in order to work in Compton, or you have to be Korean only to work in Koreatown, that is fallacious and that is hateful, and that perverts, again, the civil rights message that is used to give rights to everybody. Koreans are able to vote for the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that my ancestors, my parents and grandparents, and my ancestors before had fought so diligently to fight for this country, as well as for you to have the right to vote. We didn't give you the right to demonize us and criminalize us. We gave you the right so you can be able to do the right thing for the newer generations. So you do not have the right to pervert our legacy for your evil and capitalistic aims. This is Theo Henderson from We the Unhoused, and I thank you for listening, and may we all again meet in the light of understanding.